Hello and welcome everybody to episode 78 of Comic DNA. And it's been so long since our last episode. Alex, I've forgotten how I even do these intros for this podcast, but
I've forgotten as well.
My name is Aaron Walther, and with me as always is my good friend Alex Harner. And Alex, you are excited to talk about comics with me, I think.
We're always excited about
Always excited, despite how like grumpy and frumpy we may look now that we're on camera, but
we love comics.
Yes. Today we are going to talk about one of our mutually favorite books, We3 by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely.
Mm-hmm.
Did I pronounce his name correctly? It
yes.
is Quitely, which is like a pen name, I think.
It's a pen name.
But I like it. It's cute.
Clever.
But strangely enough, so I've been doing this podcast off and on, not super regularly, but I have been doing it for several years now. Mm-hmm. And this is the first Grant Morrison book I've talked about on this podcast, like in however many years I've been doing it. And I don't really know how or why, because I'm a pretty big fan of Grant Morrison. Like I've read a lot of his books, and for some reason, this is the first one that's come up. Just, I don't know why, but why are we talking about We3 as the first Grant Morrison book on this podcast, Alex, and not something maybe a little more popular or even
like psychedelic Grant Morrison trademark style,
or something more representative of his style? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's his. I mean, the quote on the back says it's his most accessible work, and I think that's probably true.
I think that's absolutely true. This is his most accessible work.
Yeah. So I think it's a good place to start because it's it's really good. The art's really good.
Yeah.
And it's not as hard to sell as, say, The Invisibles or Batman Run or whatever, his Batman Run is significantly different from The Invisibles, but
sure,
both of them have a density that this is.
And they had such a large scope of even this type of story they were trying to tell compared to this, which is a really small story. The story itself takes place over a weekend. Like it's literally like a really short time frame, just a small story. But it's really good. I think maybe before we go into too much more of it, just kind of describe loosely what the plot is. How would you, since this is the most accessible of all of Grant Morrison's books, how would you recommend it to somebody? How would you describe it to try and sell it to them?
Well, I think somebody else said this at some point long ago, but it's Homeward Bound meets the Terminator, or Robocop. I
was going to say Robocop. Yeah. Homeward Bound and Robocop. And that's a pretty good high concept, for my taste.
I actually mentioned it to a person earlier today.
Yeah.
I described it that way, and they went, "What?"
Yeah.
And this was a not comic reading dad of 4, but he knew both these properties. He was like, "How does that go together?"
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let Grant Morrison tell you.
Yeah. I do think that this book is indicative of the time that it was created. Because this was in 2003, 2004.
Good question.
And it was really that what I would call like the golden era of Vertigo. Or at least in the period of that golden era, like the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, where Vertigo was just pumping out.
Yeah, I think it was kind of toward as Vertigo was starting to.
Yeah, it was toward the tail end of the golden era, but I think it still came out when they were still putting out good books and people were still interested in what they were publishing, as opposed to anything in the last 15 years, I think.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of before the internet and all these other companies sort of took Vertigo's fire.
Yeah, that's the common understanding, is that Image really undercut Vertigo, because everybody that could make cool, high concept, smart, intelligent comics that were going to get optioned in Hollywood Why would you give it to DC Comics where they own it, when you can just go to Image and Image lets you own it? And then you still have the same pathways to licensing it and selling it. So it's like,
Right.
I get it. Especially when you're talking about people who are already very successful and established in the industry. It's not like Vertigo wasn't necessarily just bringing in new hot creators, and this was the trade-off. You know, you give them some of your property and you get that step into the industry. Not necessarily, but anyway, we don't really need to talk about Vertigo. We're here to talk about We3. And I think talking about that high concept of Robocop and Homeward Bound, that really is the best way to describe it. It's such a simple, easy to sell high concept that it really doesn't even feel like a Grant Morrison book. This feels like a Mark Miller idea. And anybody who knows, anybody who knows me knows that I don't hate Mark Miller. I think he's very entertaining comics, but I don't think he writes very smart comics. And
he gives the people what they want.
Yes.
Or he has a knack for honing into mass market appeal, which can be a lot of fun, but it can also be not watered down. It plays fast and dumb sometimes, which
simplistic.
Is fun,
and
I could totally imagine a Mark Miller pitch where he'd be like, well, it's like Homeward Bound with the animals you love and care about, but they're killing machines.
Yeah.
And
so that is something that I kind of want to build off of that, because this is such a simple concept, and I can imagine somebody like Mark Miller, not necessarily Mark Miller, but somebody like Mark Miller doing it and just having it not be as good. And maybe that's not fair, because the flip side of this is I don't want to put too much emphasis on Grant Morrison's role in this comic, because more than anything, I really think that this comic is a showcase for Frank Quitely's art. And I think it's really more about the artistic execution than it is about the story, because the story itself, this script could be, all 3 issues of this script could be written on a napkin. Like, just like, this could have been very simple, like a Stan Lee style script of like just a page with 3 paragraphs. In this issue, this happens. In this issue, this happens. And in this issue, this happens. And it's up to Frank Quitely to really break it down and decide how he wants to depict it on the page. I don't know if that's how they worked on this, because I know Grant usually does pretty thorough scripts, for the stuff that he, for his comics, and he definitely thinks about them visually like an artist. So
I was going to ask, I feel like recalling that Morrison has some background in art, whether or not he's particularly refined in it. He does try and sketch his stuff.
I don't know if he does like thumbnail sketches or anything like that, but I know that he thinks about his scripts visually. Like I think that's something that a lot of people that want to get into comic writing that really have no artistic experience at all, they can't really wrap their head around that, of like thinking artistically and thinking about the art on the page. And so I know Grant, I've read some of Grant Morrison's scripts. Actually, I've read some of the ones that he did with Frank Quitely on New X-Men. I know how they work together. So I'm not, this is one of those unique things in comics where it's like really hard to tell exactly whose role, like who played the greater role in what the final product is. But regardless of whether or not it was Grant Morrison, directing Frank Quitely to draw a certain way, or Frank Quitely just being unleashed and just, going off, as crazy as he can, it's a beautiful comic. And it really is in the execution, not just in like the drawing of the pretty pictures of the detailed characters, but in the actual layout. Like his layouts are just really wild in this comic.
Yeah, it looks really good. Yeah. And the layouts are phenomenal, and we could talk about those at length if you want to. But I agree with you. It does feel like very much a showcase for Frank Quitely, who I feel like is a guy, without going off on too big of a tangent, incredible artist, but like I don't feel like he has a lot of books to his name that are like, call me out here if any come to mind, where people are like, that is like the Frank Quitely book. Like this is the one for me where I'm like,
I would have to agree.
It's Frank Quitely.
I mean, in terms of what you're talking about, I think he'll always have All-Star Superman that he did with Grant Morrison also.
Yeah. Yes.
And that is a pretty solid one. But even that book, as much, and I do love All-Star Superman, as much as I love that book, it's not as like artistically experimental. I don't even necessarily want to call it experimental as We3, but like We3 definitely has some very expressly, uniquely visual storytelling style that in a way makes it feel like it's underwritten. Like it feels like Grant Morrison didn't do a whole lot. He just, like it feels like he just said, the animals escaped from the testing facility, and Frank draws like a 12-page sequence of things happening. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm giving Grant Morrison too small a credit, because it's actually it's still pretty intricate, but what I'm getting at is that there's not a lot of text on the page. All the story is told visually, which really puts the pressure on Frank Quitely to really sell it, and which I think he does.
Yeah. I feel like I need to like walk back my previous statement a little bit, because of how much I like Frank Quitely. He has a lot of amazing work. I think what I mean to say is I'm surprised that he hasn't, like, how to put it, like had a movie made of something that he's made, or become like, maybe amongst comic fans he's a big deal. I'm surprised he hasn't become just a bigger deal overall, given how talented he is. Like he doesn't have a lot of work that like not transcends, but has found mass appeal outside of comics.
Yeah, you're right, and maybe that's just part of the downside of working with Grant Morrison, because Grant Morrison also has had that problem, I think. And it's interesting when you compare him to somebody like Mark Millar, who, how like they were friends at one point, and Morrison was even a mentor to Millar, and then they kind of had their little falling out, and Millar kind of went on to be the big comics to movie superstar, and Grant Morrison is still just the comic book guy. Like hardly any of Grant Morrison's stuff has really translated to Hollywood movies, whereas everything that Mark Millar does is with the intent of being remade into a movie or a TV show, and he's had like a lot of stuff, like surprisingly a lot. And
maybe what it says is Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely are just too good at making comics.
Well, that's what I would say, and it's similar to the something that Alan Moore has said about Watchmen, that he and Dave Gibbons created Watchmen to be unfilmable. Like the story exists in the language of comics.
It's meant to be comics.
Yeah, and I do think that Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely probably do have the same mentality. Like it's meant to be comics. And there are several instances in We3 that really are, it's the language of comics that's telling the story. It's not just the idea of a dog in a mech suit fighting things. Like it really is, there's specific ways the story is told through the medium of comics that I think make it really unique and really great, and why it's a masterpiece, and why it's elevated above what could be trashy schlock.
Yeah.
Like I could imagine Mark Millar and like a lesser artist just making just a real like trashy gore fest. And it's like, this book is gory, you know what I mean? But
tremendously gory.
It's really bloody and really violent.
But it's, briefly on that, it's sad.
Exactly,
like, there's very little in it where I'm like, like he got him. Right. Like most of the scenes of violence it's like watching a war movie. It's tragic, and it's like
that's what makes the
intentional, right?
Yeah, and that's what makes the tone of the book so interesting, because like first of all, I'll just say it's not fair to write stories about animals being abused. Like it's not fair, because that is emotionally manipulative. And I don't know why. I'm somebody who, I like animals, but I eat meat. Like I understand this thing, but like fiction about animals is it really tugs at the heartstrings, and I have a hard time dealing with it. It's one of those things, and I know that's not unique to me. I know that's like a common understanding. Like, Stephen King said that like the most hate mail he ever got was like for killing a dog, something to that effect. I don't remember, but you know, and so I do think that without trying to go all over the place, one aspect of the story that I want to ask you about. I want to bring this up because on the subject of it being emotionally manipulative by using animals and having animals trying to find their way home after escaping from a military program that turned them into killing machines. In the context of this story, why are all three animals lost pets? Who it's ambiguous as to whether they were lost or abducted.
Right.
Why are they owned by somebody else? And this is where the cynical jerk in me comes in and says, what kind of military program wouldn't be able to just breed a dog for their system? Why is
go to the pet store?
Exactly. Go to the pet store and buy a stupid cat. Like, why is this a little 8-year-old girl's missing cat who wants her cat back?
Right.
That's not fair. That is emotionally manipulative.
I agree with you there. I actually paused. I hadn't read this in a while. I was rereading it today.
Yeah.
Each originally when it was published, each
issue
cover was one of the animals, and it was a missing poster. Like my cat is lost.
Yep.
And yeah, I paused because it's a good cover design. It looks good.
Brilliant cover design. I actually love it. Like, I understand like from a visual, like a emotional storytelling sense of like why, you know, of course the animals are lost pets because isn't that terrible? Don't you just feel bad for the animals? But I can't stop and just say why? Like,
it does feel a little like, I mean, by and large, the story doesn't come across to me as super propaganda. Maybe you have different thoughts, but that's where it does, where it feels like it's a activist, like,
yes,
you guys, the military-industrial complex is bad, right?
Right, yeah, because they're gonna take your kid's dog and turn it into a tank,
right?
And it's like, why would they waste? You know, like, why would they even do that? Like, it's not hard to come across a dog.
Right.
Is this like little person's lost cat, the perfect cat specimen? Like,
right. Especially when the one doctor is sold as a sympathetic character who develops a bond with these animals.
So that's,
like, she had to like steal them from children first.
Right. Yeah. So that's where my complaint comes in about maybe it being a little underwritten. And that's why I want to say this is obviously a showcase for Frank Quitely's art, and I'm sure Grant Morrison had a lot of input, you know, on how the story unfolded, but I can't believe that he didn't have some idea, or he couldn't come up with even some reason, like why they're, you know, just some line about the doctor that we're sympathetic with, like, didn't want to work with. You know, like they needed animals that had some kind of bond with a human so that they'd be more trainable. Some
sort of empathetic, human connection.
Exactly. Like, it doesn't work on wild animals. Like, you have to have a dog that's already been domesticated, and it works even better if that they already love a kid. You know what I mean? Just some, like, the thing is, I don't think Grant Morrison is above that kind of idea. Like, he could throw out that idea really simply, and I would be totally sold on it if he was just like, oh, you know, the brain surgery doesn't work unless it's on a dog that has already aligned itself with a family. Otherwise, you know, it's like, I don't know. You know, you could.
Yeah, the dogs will only be loyal if they have known love. You know,
exactly. Yes, something like that. You know, but there's not even like a lip service to that, and maybe it sounds nitpicky, but it bothers me a little bit because then I'm thinking at the end of this book, I'm like crying because these animals are not, you know, getting back to their owners, and then I'm like, but why do they even have owners in the first place? Like, you know, and then I'm just mad because I don't like being emotionally manipulated.
The thought totally occurred to me that the United States government can afford a few stray cats.
Right, yeah, exactly. They're spending billions of dollars turning dogs into tanks and cats into silent ninja assassins, but they can't just go down to a breeder and like buy like a high quality, perfectly healthy dog. It has to be some missing mutt.
Right. It's a little strange.
Yeah, it's well, and it also bothers me because again, and maybe this is why, maybe this was why I do think it was somewhat intentionally done this way, not necessarily just an oversight. Like I'm not accusing Grant Morrison of just not thinking about it or just not writing about it, because they don't say like, were these just lost? Were these animals that went missing ended up at a pound and some government official just went to the pound and was like, I'll take that one, and that one. And then it just turned, animals at a pound, they're going to be a mix of lost pets and stray dogs and whatnot.
Yeah, that's true. The cover design has nothing comes into the story.
Exactly. It doesn't imply that these animals were kidnapped, or it doesn't say how they came across these animals at all. Mm-hmm. But those covers make it very clear that these animals belong to somebody else. And there is the moment in the book where the doctor, the female doctor, I forget her name, Johnson, maybe?
I just read it.
Yeah.
But yes.
Where she is like trying to trap the animals, and she has the dog, and the dog is listening to her, and she tells the dog his name, like, Duke, right?
Says, you are not one, you are Bandit.
Yeah, Bandit. Yeah, that's it, Bandit. Duh. And because the dogs are the animals are all named just the number of like, that's their designation, number 1, number 2, number 3. And she tells him that he has a name, and his name is Bandit, and he's got a home, and he's got to get back to his home. And so like there is that scene where it's implied. It's not like it's not like, it almost could have been an afterthought, like where they're just like, the government just has these animals, and then when they're doing the cover design, like Frank Quitely or somebody's like, oh, what if we did the cover design like they're all lost animals, and then I'll just add that little emotional pull that but it's in the story, like it's actually written in the story that
there needed to be some reason for them to go home.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're just wild killing machines.
Right. Exactly.
That need for a return
to go once they were let loose. I get that, but that's why, again, I'm not going to keep harping on it because I sound like I'm harping on it, but that's why I could maybe make the claim that it's a little underwritten, because it didn't sell this idea that these dogs, this dog and cat and rabbit have a home, and how did they get separated from their home? Like the movie Homeward Bound was really simple. It was an accident. The family was moving. The animals were going to be transported, in a second trip. And then the animals don't know that. The humans all leave, and the animals freak out and think they've been abandoned. It's very straightforward, very simple. This doesn't have that. And it sounds like it bothers me a lot. And maybe it does, but also it doesn't, because really what you get out of this is beautiful artwork. It's not about the story. It's about the high concept and Frank Quitely's art and the way he sells it and in execution. I think at the end of the day. But I will have to give it a demerit point.
I understand the frustration because it wouldn't have taken more than a single word balloon. Right. So,
yeah.
To just maybe say, oh, okay, that's why this weird thing is happening.
Right. And I guess this will be the last thing I say on it, but I guess it also just maybe irritates me or confuses me, because it just seems like something that Morrison would be able to do handily. Like,
seems like he would enjoy that.
It seemed like he would enjoy that layer. Exactly. Like it seemed like that'd be something he would actually want to, like his style of writing would highlight in a unique way, like very simply in a high concept way. And he would, like I said, he would really be able to sell it, and it would make a great, like, emotional tug at the story. But it's just absent.
Yeah.
In a conspicuous way. It really makes me. It bothers me more than anything. Now I'm just like, why?
It bothers you because the rest of it is so amazing.
It is, yes, exactly. Yeah.
I've gone on about this for like 10 minutes.
I have.
I actually really love this comic.
I do, and that's why. Well, there's many times I would maybe say this is my favorite Grant Morrison book, which is maybe silly because he's written a lot of stuff, and he's definitely written a lot more complex stuff than this. This isn't that complex, but it's just a beautiful book, and it's it's touching in its emotionally manipulative way, and I like animals. People like animals. I also love Robocop. Robocop's a perfect movie, so I love Homeward Bound too. It is very funny. It's a classic movie. But anyway, so moving on.
Okay. So on the topic of the art and the emotional manipulation, I agree with you that hurting an animal is the easiest way to tug at the heartstrings.
Oh yes.
In fiction, it's because it's horrible, and we see animals as innocent, and
animals are the ultimate innocent.
Right. But there were some other moments in this book that they played off the innocence of animals that were maybe a little more complex. I'm wondering if you saw them as at all kind of playing to the same tune of animals are innocent, humans are violent. This is so sad.
Yes. Well, that was absolutely. I mean, this is definitely a story about like evil man corrupting nature.
Sure.
That's absolutely what this is. This is the evil military-industrial complex turning these animals into monsters, But
did you feel like any of the moments, though, transcended that simple animal manipulation and were accomplished with exceptional artistry?
I
ask because I have one in particular.
So explain to me the scene you're talking about.
And maybe see what you think.
Okay.
So it's the scene where the rabbit's lagging behind and he's in the road.
Yeah.
And there's a hunter with his kid out. And they don't know what to make of the rabbit.
Yeah. They think it's like a space alien or something.
Yeah, and it approaches the dad. The dad loses his cool and shoots it.
Yeah.
And it basically sets off the panic triggers and all the animals.
Right.
And the way Quitely draws it, I thought was so good. Just like it's a tragic thing that happens, like, oh, you shot the animal. But then what follows is just this incredible sequence of panels where, like, the rabbit shot and it happens in like 3 panels.
Yeah.
The dog and the cat go into kill mode.
Yeah.
And you get this like scene where the cat's decapitating the hunting dog.
Yeah.
And the dog's about to take the dad's head off.
Yeah.
This is a tremendously violent book, in case you were wondering. And it's like dot dot dot, and then it goes red panel. Like,
yeah,
and you can actually hear the panel. I think, like, what I hear is like,
yes, absolutely.
The camera feed just broke. Something really bad just happened. And then the next scene, the dog does that dog shame look, which is manipulative. Yeah. And you there's pieces of this body in the background.
Yeah.
And the dog's only words are like, "Is bad dog."
Yeah.
It's like,
the dog goes into instant shameful dog.
This is not what I'm supposed to do as a dog who is owned by humans. It's manipulative, but it's done so well that it like kind of like, I don't know, like it could have just been rabbit shot or dog is sad, but like I don't know. I thought it was really well done.
No, I agree. That's I mean, that scene itself is just like, this story just hits all these beats so perfectly, and that's that tragic moment, where they're all having their falling out, and it's like, right, because I love the way the personality of the animals, because I love the way the cat just keeps wanting to just leave.
Yeah.
And the cat's like, I don't care about humans. I'm just gonna stay here. Like,
yeah.
And
the default word is, or his, her, I don't remember. Stink.
Yeah, stink. Exactly. Stink humans. Just the cat's just always complaining, and Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely definitely really captured the animal personalities, and like really well. And maybe that's not the most difficult thing to do, but I think they sell it really well in this, especially with the setup of these animals kind of having like these augmented intelligence where they can kind of speak and they have this just a slightly higher understanding of the world, but they still still can't like stop their animalistic nature. Like they still act like a dog and a cat and a rabbit. And they're like like that scene is just so good because it's the rabbit. It's just scared. Like it's just in the street and it's trying to find somebody to help it. So it just sees a human and they think of the human as the boss because that's just how they operated. And the people just freak out because they don't, the hunter just doesn't know what it is. And the rabbit just has like no concept of the danger that he's in because he's a rabbit.
Right. Yeah, the cat and the dog are further away.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh no, like,
yeah,
their simplistic way, like, the rabbit's dumb. What's he doing?
Exactly. Yeah, the rabbit is dumb. yeah, it's great. But yeah, I get what you're saying about like being elevated. But I think that's all done in the art. I think that's in how it's presented. Like you see like you said, like the cat decapitates the dog, and that's pretty rough. But then, like you said, you don't see the dad get his face shredded by the dog, and that's just all kind of tastefully done. So like we're talking about the art and like the framing and stuff there, but there's some other specific scenes that I wanted to bring up that are specifically about the execution of it being a comic book, like in the comic book art. And it's I think one of my favorite is the 2-page spread in issue 2, where the cat is just viciously murdering all these army soldiers, and you see the panels. It's like a Doppler effect. Like the panels are like at an angle, and they keep like angling in more until they're like almost horizontal. But the cat is on a different dimension than these panels. So these panels are like 3D, like represented in a third dimension. Like we're seeing them not on a flat 2D surface, but the cat is in a flat 2D surface, and the cat is going in and out of the panels, and the human soldiers are in the panels. And
there's even a line about like when the soldiers are going after them, they experience space and time differently. Like you're not going to die.
That's what I was about to say. They're like, you don't understand how dangerous these things are. They're killing animals. They experience time differently than we do. And this page is a perfect comics-specific visual representation of the cat experiencing time differently than the humans, because the cat is moving in and out of what would be called the gutters of the comic book page, which is gutters is the time space between events in the panels. So this is like a wonderful double page spread, which at first glance it's just like that's kind of weird looking, but like it really is saying so much about this cat just slaughtering these people. Because just imagine, like you can imagine how this scene would play out in a movie. Well, like a hack director, a schlock hack Hollywood director would just film it with lots of shaky quick pans of like, there's a soldier screaming after having his eyes popped, and the camera pans over and you see the cat on top of somebody, and then it pans over and the cat, you know what I mean? And it would just be really trashy. But this is such a nice, like clean and elegant way, an artistic way of showing this cat brutally slaughtering these people, like in a way that they just can't fathom. I think it's one of the standout pieces of art in this whole book. And if this original art hasn't sold for a tremendous amount of money, I would be surprised. I know Frank does sell some of his original art, but I have to imagine that's got to be one of his most valuable.
That's really cool. It works really well within the medium and the world that's established. There's a lot of little moments like that where it's just wonderful comic execution. Grant Morrison is just really good.
He is.
There's that sequence in the first issue that's like, what is it, like 6 pages of
just
18 panel grids?
Blocks of panel grids. I did actually want to talk about that sequence of how I love how much story is told in that sequence. Like, I like that and maybe this is just a product of it being a 3-issue series, but again, this is one of those things that makes me go back to like the power of comics and why comics is such a strong medium, because so much information is really given here, and it reads so quickly, but you can gloss over it, or you can really take the time to soak in what's being shown on these pages, because you really get this like just the intensity of the situation of like all the panels going back and forth between what the different characters are doing. Kind of, you get the sense that it's like all happening at the same time, you know? And I think it's a really great way of, let's see, how would I say this? It's a really great way of creating a cinematic effect without it just being a widescreen comic of 4 panels a page of just you know, static images just slowly spread out across 22-page decompressed comic. Like, I think we talked about this several years ago when we talked about the Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa, and how I'm so impressed at how that, I mean, his manga art has like oftentimes like 12 panels a page or more, but it still feels very cinematic in the action and the way that it's laid out and the way the characters move across the page. And that, to me, is much greater representation of how great comics are than the traditional widescreen comics that are made to look like a film, just with their static widescreen panels just repeating over and over again.
Right. Yeah. It's using the medium a little more.
Yeah. Exactly. But it still creates a cinematic effect.
It does, which culminates in the double-page spread of them escaping.
Right. And exactly. It builds up to this beautiful 2-page spread, and instead of just being a series of like full-page spreads, which other creators do quite often as an excuse to pretend to be cinematic.
Yeah.
There's pacing to this, you know.
It creates a sense of pacing and a sense of space, of captivity.
Yes.
Which, when you finally get to them getting out, it's like...
And then it's open.
Breathe.
Yes. I mean, that 2-page spread is so good. It's nothing but the night sky and the animals, you know, jumping to their freedom. Like, it's so, like you said, it's ultimate freedom. Like, all the previous panels were so small and claustrophobic, and then you have this beautiful open space 2-page spread. It's, again, this is the medium, using the medium to visually tell a story. That, like, this is one of those things where you might not necessarily be consciously aware that you're absorbing this much information as you're looking at the art, but you really are. You know, you like your brain is understanding this information. It's being fed this information visually. That, to me, is the power of comics, and that's why I really love We3.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you, and I'm not sure I have anything else smart to say on it other than the art anyway. It uses the medium super well. As I'm looking down, I'm looking at the comic.
Of course, yes.
Like, what else? Yeah, really good use of big panels and small panels, and compression and release and tension and yeah. What did you think of this is kind of changing subject a little bit.
Go ahead.
I didn't really think about this before, but for some reason it struck me as a little more interesting this time around. Toward the end, spoilers, the dog and the cat are running away, and the cat, or the dog, sees his arm, like presumably for the first time in a long while, because they wear these massive suits of armor.
Yeah.
And, his armor is damaged, and he sees his arm, and he like has this epiphany, like, is coat not we? Which, like,
yes,
it is the shell they're wearing, not us.
Yes.
And when he sees his leg, basically they have a little argument, the cat and the dog, and they eventually pull free of these shells that they've been put in.
Yes, there is that. There is that kind of existential, identity crisis where,
right.
and this is where this is kind of like elevated schlock, where, this is like exactly what Robocop did, but like it's a silly concept, but but like there is something there, there is something there, and the dog, like asking the question, like he realizes he's broken, and he says, "Is leg coat?" Like, and there's that understanding that you are more than your shell. You're more than what your outside appearance, what you've been created into being. So there is that. Yeah, there's that idea that these animals have souls, and that's
There's this kind of the dog's eyes even get big. Quite kind of draws it. Is this like he's just discovered something?
He's had an awakening. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But it's like, again, like a lesser book could have just like overwritten that part and really harped on it and gone on and on and on, preached at length about, how animals are pure and they're just as great as human beings. And it could have gotten really preachy there, but it didn't. It just had that emotional moment of just like the dog realizing something, and then you get it all in the visual, and then it moves on. Like it doesn't, it feeds you all the information and it touches on it and it kind of just presents the idea to you for you to think about in the context of the story, but it doesn't necessarily tell you one way or the other what you're supposed to think. And I think that's another thing that makes it really smart.
I agree. It's delivered in a way that, I don't know, I've read this a number of times. Yeah. I hadn't really even like lingered on this page before, but this time through I was like, it's a fairly simple thing that's being shown, but it's artfully done. Yeah.
I have to agree. That was, I've read this book several times. I bought it when it came out. I was, very excited to read it when it came out. And that is something that, obviously I read it, but I don't know if I ever really like paused on it or just like absorbed it as an important part of the story. But that was something that stuck out to me again on rereading, where I was like, because it's like I don't want to, maybe a little younger when this came out, and I was really impressed by all the action and the gore, but then like on rereading it, I'm like, oh, there's some big questions really being presented here beyond the simple, animals are innocent and man is evil. Like, there is a little bit more going on there, and it just gives me all the more appreciation for this comic.
Yeah. Agreed. And for Frank Quitely.
And for Frank Quitely. My
God. Props to both of them.
Yeah, props to both of them. But yes, I do, like a guy like Frank Quitely, I don't actually know what he's done recently, but because I know he has problems he had problems sticking to deadlines, and
he's a very detailed artist,
right?
So he does tend to take a while.
Yeah,
he did a thing with Mark Millar not too long ago.
Which one was that?
That was Jupiter's Legacy.
Oh, okay. Actually, you're right. I do remember that, and I was half tempted to read it. I would be kind of curious to see how does Frank Quitely's art work with Mark Millar as the writer, as opposed to Grant Morrison.
Right. And they worked on a few little things here and there, but this I think was a little more like written for him.
Yeah.
So, maybe we should investigate sometime.
It might be worth checking out.
Yeah. I don't know what he's done since. That's the last thing I've been keeping up on. So, hopefully, he keeps making wonderful things.
I hope so.
Art is magical. So,
I do think that he's a guy that, it's cool to see him draw like the X-Men and Superman and whatnot. But I do think he's a guy that, like, he almost deserves to have his own bibliography of just unique books, about weird concepts or whatever. Like, you know, I do think he doesn't have enough of that. You know, there really needs to be more Frank Quitely books. I guess that's all I'm saying.
I just want more Frank Quitely.
Maybe that's just selfish of me to say that. Draw more.
Yeah. More high concept sci-fi.
Yeah, I think he's tailor-made for that kind of stuff. Yeah. But yeah, so I think we did a good job of talking about this book without really talking about the actual story at all, other than highlights here and there. But I think that there's also not a lot to say about the story. Like I imagine most people, once you understand the high concept and everything that we've just said, military turns the animals into killing machines and then they escape. You already know this story. Yeah. You know what I mean?
No, it's less about the plot and more about the experience.
Exactly. Yeah. The story tells itself, but it's just brilliantly executed, and in a way that it elevates it above schlock, but is still not too high and mighty to emotionally manipulate you and tug at your heartstrings for reasons that might not necessarily make sense in the story, but you know, they're animals.
What kind of special forces team steals a person's rabbit? I just
right. How do you even how many lost rabbits can there possibly be? Like, I imagine a house pet rabbit that goes outside is just going to get eaten by a hawk, like, after its second day. Like, how's the military going to come across it?
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know.
Well, I think that's about all I have to say about We3. I think it's a brilliant book. I think it's absolutely worth reading, and I definitely think it's a brilliant case study in how to make comics. Like, if you're interested in the true strength of comics as a medium, this is a brilliant example of something that is kind of a high concept. It's kind of silly looking, like, when you think about it, like, you know, but it's also something that would be, it's something that, this is another thing I kind of wanted to touch on briefly. It's something that, like, works really well for comics, because this would be kind of difficult to do as a film. Not impossible, but, like, you're talking about, like, you know, like, these days, I guess it would be easy because, you know, everything is CGI. But, you know, even even like in the early 2000s, like this, I think they would have had a hard time fast tracking this into a film without it looking like the old 80s Pet Cemetery with like awkward puppets.
Animatronic.
Yeah, exactly. Which could have had its own charm. I'm not saying I wouldn't have enjoyed that, but, like, you know, animal wranglers, it's a difficult thing, particularly cats. Like, you can train dogs or whatever, and rabbits are just going to sit there. But you know, but this is something that's really easy. It's really easy to make a comic about, and just be like, the dog does this, the cat does this, the rabbit does, you know, this, and you just draw it as it happens. Whereas, like, there's all these other layers of making it into a film that I can see somebody being like, this is a brilliant concept for a film, but it'd be too much of a pain in the butt to try and make. And, you know, it's like, have you priced rabbit wranglers these days? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think too, I think you could make a movie of it. I think we both agree you really hate looking to movies as it, like, the final goal of comics.
A validation of comics' existence? No, absolutely.
No,
yeah, that's not why I read comics. And
And I get to that point, because this comic is so violent, it works as a drawn thing. Yeah. It works as a kind of childish, innocent concept meets, like, horrors of war concept. And I think part of the reason it works is because it's drawn, and there's your mind fills in the gaps between the panels and dictates the pace, and it's a step removed from reality, despite the fact that it's very unsettling. I don't know if I'd really want to see, you know, this realized in film with the violence and detail of John Wick 3 or whatever.
Right.
I think that misses the point, part of which is this is supposed to be unsettling. It's not supposed to be the slickest CGI kill counts.
Yeah.
I just think the comic medium works better with the reality of the unpleasantness they're trying to share.
Yeah, no, I agree. Ironically, I feel like this is Grant Morrison's book that would be easiest to translate into a film, because it's such a, it's such a simple concept. Like
other stuff.
The way you sell it is by listing two films, Robocop and Homeward Bound. It's such a simple way. It's such a simple concept, but at the same time, I imagine there's all these extra hurdles, and I'm not even talking about like making it look good and getting real animals on set. I mean, things like, I can imagine this is the type of thing where they're like, we can't do a story where a pet rabbit gets shot in the head with a shotgun. Like, people won't allow that. And all this stuff about animal testing, like, it's going to make people uncomfortable. Like, the gore isn't going to bother people, but seeing this dog with wires sticking out of its brain,
yeah,
that's going to make people throw up and cry.
Right.
So there is this kind of goes back to that whole, like, it's such a great thing as a comic book, because I do feel like it kind of exists uniquely as a comic. And
I agree.
I have no doubt that someday somebody could probably make a nice film about this, of this adaptation of this. But
some new thing when audiences get bored and they need to have their expectations defied because reasons. Exactly.
I mean, I think it could even be a good, like, kind of like trashy, low budget film. Like, I'm sure somebody owns the rights to it. Like, you know what I mean? I'm sure somebody does, but
it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, but I think it works even better as a comic book, as I've said over and over again. And that's the comics that I love the most are the things that work great as comics, and they're a representation of comics medium and how great it is. And I think that this is a standout pinnacle of that thing that I just said.
I concur.
Yes.
We are in agreement.
Yes. All right. I think that's going to do it for this episode. I could see your wife impatiently wandering around the background.
Dinner time for our dog.
Talking about dogs. My cat was on my lap, and then halfway through the podcast, she decided she didn't want to be on my lap anymore and left. So maybe she got uncomfortable with all this talk about animal testing and murder.
Maybe. Yeah.
But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I think Alex and I both recommend reading We3 if you haven't already. Maybe we will do another Grant Morrison book sometime in the future. Maybe something that's a little more complex or representative of Grant Morrison's dope smoking, DMT taking.
Something more acid trippy.
Yeah, more acid trippy, surreal, whatever. Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, we got a few things kind of on the list. I know we do these podcasts sporadically, but we've got a few things kind of coming up that we want to find time to do. So maybe I'll find another good Grant Morrison book to wedge in there.
We'll pick up our pace.
Yeah.
Produce more. Get Some Grant Morrison.
Whatever. But thank you, everybody, for listening. You can, these videos are up on our YouTube channel, and you can download MP3s of this at comicdna.podbean.com. And, of course, you can read some of the comics that I write. As a comic book writer, I speak with a certain authority when I criticize Grant Morrison for his weak, hackneyed writing in this perfect book. As an amateur writer, I think I know what I'm talking about. You can find my comics at www.aaronwalther.com, and my current all-ages superhero comic that I'm writing called The Uncontrollable Recklass. You can read that at uncontrollablerecklass.com, and I'll put links in the description. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.